Talhotblond and MarineSniper thought they were a match made in heaven, or at the very least, a match made in cyberspace. Despite being separated by multiple states, only communicating through chat rooms and phone calls, and the rather impersonal connection they shared, the people behind these two usernames felt very real feelings for each other. MarineSniper was a handsome young Marine heading to Iraq who first entered the world of team chat rooms through his participation in the popular online gaming site Pogo in 2005. The Talhotblond handle belonged to a high school senior and softball player named Jesse from West Virginia. The pair engaged in a passionate love affair, and though up until this point they never met in real life, that didn't hinder their love story or their affection for each other. But as is the case in most online affairs, not everything was as it seemed, and not everyone was who they appeared to be. And what would be revealed at the end of this affair would be a twist so monumental it would leave everyone involved shocked beyond belief. Welcome to the Dark Omnibus, where only the strangest and darkest tales reside. We invite you to join our dark family by subscribing to the channel. Also, be sure to turn on all notifications so you don't miss a single submission. Now, settle in, Dark Ones, as we begin today's story. Thomas Montgomery was a married father of two, and in 2005, he found himself a washed-up, middle-aged former Marine, still living through the memories and nostalgia of his glory days as a young soldier. But now, unlike the adventures he'd experienced in his 20s, his days and nights were spent on the internet, fully disconnected from reality, and from his wife and two teenage daughters. Rather than embracing the responsibility and the reward of being a loving husband and father, he instead chose to lose himself in a steamy online love affair with a 17-year-old high schooler named Jesse, who operated in various internet chat rooms under the alias Talhotblond Big 50. Thomas Montgomery was known in the chat rooms as MarineSniper, and his profile picture showed an 18-year-old man, handsome, with a chiseled chin and strong features. But the real man behind the keyboard was something entirely different. He was 46 years old, with a head sparsely topped with thinning hair, and a chin that reflected more than a few years of sedentary accumulation. Over the course of a few months, Jesse and Thomas exchanged countless erotic messages and explicit photographs. She and Tommy, as she affectionately called him, also exchanged gifts, phone calls, and love letters. Soon, the relationship went beyond flirtation, and the two engaged in virtual sex, which apparently made Thomas feel, in his own words, kind of dirty, but not enough to prevent him from continuing the illicit affair with the teenager. Rather, he found their relationship exciting and was somehow able to justify his actions with his feelings, however illegitimate both his and the reciprocated feelings from the young girl may have been. The dishonest nature of his feelings coming from his age and appearance, which he kept hidden behind the fake pictures that he shared, and the illegitimacy of the girl's feelings stemming from the fact that she was completely unaware of who she was actually talking to. However, the relationship continued, all the while Jesse remaining clueless about who she was dating. The next year, in 2006, Thomas wrote a note to himself, a New Year's resolution, if you will, which read, on January 2nd, 2006, Tom Montgomery, 46 years old, ceases to exist and is replaced by an 18-year-old battle-scarred Marine. He is moving to West Virginia to be with the love of his life, and through this MarineSniper avatar, Thomas was able to continue living another life, his descent into this alter ego's existence going deeper than ever before. In this life, he was a younger, stronger, more virile version of himself. Tommy was a good-looking tall Marine with big muscles and bright red hair, but the facade was a figment of Thomas's imagination, a desperate attempt by an aging man to hang on to a past that had so quickly escaped him. But soon, this fantasy world that he had created would come crashing down around him. One day, one of Thomas Montgomery's daughters sat at the family's computer desk as she did her homework after school. A message popped up on the screen, and this message confused the girl so much that she felt the need to go and tell her mother. When Cindy, Thomas's wife, read the message for herself, she felt things deep inside her that she'd never felt before. Disgust, hurt, and rage. The message was from Jessie and had affectionately greeted Tommy in her usual way, fully unaware that it was not actually Tommy who occupied the seat in front of the screen. Cindy immediately went into detective mode and began searching the entire house, hoping to find further proof of that which she feared most. She also wanted evidence to present to her husband when she inevitably confronted him. She searched room after room, and after a while she stumbled upon a box filled with love letters, mementos, and photos of her husband's young cyber lover, more than one of the items being a pair of red lacy underwear, the sight of which pushed Cindy over the edge. She banished Thomas to the basement and told him that if he wanted to separate or end their marriage, she was fine with that, but she needed to do something immediately to get him away from her and their daughters. With the emotional blow still crippling her thoughts, Cindy decided to send a picture of the entire Montgomery family to Jessie, getting her mailing address from one of the letters Jessie had sent to Thomas. Cindy included an accompanying message. "Let me introduce you to these people," she wrote. "The man in the center is Tom, my husband since 1989. He is 46 years old. Don't believe everything you see on the computer." When Jessie received Cindy's letter, she was stunned. She wasn't sure who to believe. Tommy, who she'd loved and grown so close to over the last few months, or this random woman who claimed to be the wife of a man she didn't actually know. In order to gain more information about the true identity of Tommy, she reached out to one of his co-workers to confirm what she'd been told. The young man's name was Brian Barrett, a 22-year-old man who worked with Thomas at Dynabrade Corp. Just outside of Buffalo, New York. He was a machinist, similar to the real-life Thomas, and had even worked under Tom for a period of time in a mentor-mentee relationship. Jessie remembered Tommy mentioning Brian in the past, along with the username Brian used on their preferred chat platform. When she reached out to Brian, to her surprise he answered, and the two started discussing the current situation, Jessie explaining to Brian what Thomas's wife had told her in the letter. It was then that Brian confirmed what Jessie truly didn't want to hear. Thomas was, in fact, the 46-year-old husband and father that Cindy had shown her in the picture. Truly hurt, Jessie immediately broke off the relationship with the man, having no idea she wasn't actually talking to a single young soldier named Tommy all this time, but instead had been engaging in an extensive, intimate relationship with a middle-aged man who had a wife and 2 kids, both nearly her own age. She immediately sent Tom a text message saying she hated him and that he should be put in jail for his actions. Brian was quick to console Jessie and offer emotional support through the ordeal, and before long the two found that they shared a connection. Brian's username was Beefcake, and this man's online presence seemed to actually match his real-life persona. Unlike Tommy, Brian was who he said he was, young, handsome, and obviously a much better fit for young Jessie. In light of this, it didn't take long for Jessie to start sending Brian pictures, much like the pictures she had sent Tommy in the past. This conversation was new and exciting, and before long Brian and Jessie had officially become a cyber couple and were in contact with each other each and every day. The problem, however, was that Jessie also stayed in contact with Thomas. Even after the betrayal and the revelation of Thomas's age and familial status, the two found themselves chatting via instant message once again. "I ache to be with Tommy," she said. "Do you miss it, Tom?" "More than you will ever know," Thomas said. "My heart aches to hear you call me your Tommy. I wish I could be that 19-year-old Marine for you." "I know, Tom," she replied. Despite her continued conversations with Thomas, Brian and Jessie were not exactly quiet about their newfound relationship. Brian even talked openly about their relationship at work, which made Thomas extremely jealous. Jessie and Brian were also very vocal in their chat room about Tommy's true identity, desecrating his online reputation and letting the other users know that Tommy wasn't actually a young Marine, but instead a middle-aged man pretending to be someone else. They openly accused him of being a predator and put out a warning for others to keep their distance. And yet, even with all the disparaging remarks and Brian and Jessie's very open discussions about their relationship, Jessie still held on to her connection with Thomas, continuing to look past his betrayal and secretly talking to him behind Brian's back, even holding conversations about the same intimate fantasies they'd shared in the past. Thomas was overjoyed that Jessie continued to be a part of his life. He continually expressed his feelings for her, their relationship being like a drug that he couldn't quit. But it didn't take long for Jessie to grow tired of the aging man and their fruitless correspondence. Her relationship with Brian began to take priority in her life, and she once again found that it was time to call it quits with her former lover. Needless to say, this unexpected and final disconnect, enforced by the girl he had been so infatuated with, enraged Thomas. Somehow these three, Jesse, Thomas, and Brian, found themselves in a full-blown love triangle. The two grown men, Thomas and Brian, seemed to be fighting for the affection of a high schooler that lived several states away, but whom neither of them had met. The stakes were high, and it was only a matter of time before this illicit triangle would escalate to a life-and-death situation. But it was business as usual for Brian and Jesse. It was Thomas who was truly affected. Things had gone from bad to worse for him when he'd recently learned that Brian was going to meet Jesse in person. And unfortunately, this would be the catalyst that would cause Thomas to fall headfirst into a downward spiral. All his rage, jealousy, and desperation culminating in a single instant message he sent to Jesse late one night. "You have done what I have feared most. Turned my heart ice cold. Brian will pay in blood." Just before 10 o'clock on the night of September 15th, 2006, Brian Barrett was at work. He stood at his station making mental notes and silently preparing for a trip. He and Jesse had recently spoken about the possibility of meeting in person, and when Brian offered to drive the full distance between upstate New York and West Virginia, Jesse had agreed. Later, however, Jesse changed her mind and said she wasn't ready to meet Brian in person and that she preferred to keep their relationship online for the time being. It's hard to know what drove him, love, desire, or mere curiosity, but whichever of these filled him at that moment was enough to force the young man to ignore Jesse's decision and continue with his plans to make the drive down to the girl he'd spent so much time with on the phone and on the internet. He figured that by the time he had finished the trip, she would have changed her mind and welcomed him with open arms. At 10:15 p.m., Brian's shift had ended, and a moment later, he was crossing the large Dynabrade parking lot, heading toward his car, filled with the excitement over the decision he had made just moments before. He swung open the door of his truck and settled into the driver's seat, ready to begin the drive home. But just then, 3 quick shots rang out, and 3 bullets pierced through the driver's side window. Each one tore through the cloth of Brian's jacket and then straight through the flesh of his neck and arm. A few seconds later, Brian Barrett slumped sideways and breathed his last breath. Hours later, early in the morning, Brian Barrett was found dead in his car in the parking lot of Dynabrade Corp. He had been shot with a military-style rifle. Sheriff's investigators believed Brian's killer wore camouflage and a ski mask when he had approached the younger man in the parking lot after he'd entered his truck and fired a .30 caliber rifle at close range. During the immediate investigation, police searched Brian and Thomas's computers and quickly uncovered the love triangle. They compiled hundreds of pages of correspondence, finding much of the content was adult in nature. They also uncovered threats made by Thomas toward both Brian and Jesse. But when they couldn't find Thomas, suddenly their top priority was reaching Jesse in Oakville, West Virginia, to make sure she was alive and safe, and that she had not become another victim of the same killer who'd murdered Brian Barrett. Police were immediately dispatched to Jesse's home, and when they finally arrived, what they found there would come as a shock to investigators, as well as the friends and family of both of the 2 men back in New York. When the police finally arrived at Jesse's home in West Virginia, they knocked on the door, hoping to find the girl and her family alive and well. Mary Sheeler, Jesse's mother, answered the door, and by the calm and confused look on her face, police got the idea that everything in the Sheeler home was normal. They asked to speak with Jesse. Mary explained that Jesse wasn't home and that she had no way of contacting her daughter at the moment. As officers began to explain the situation to Mary, who Thomas and Brian were, Jesse's involvement, and how the 2 men had been in an altercation directly related to her daughter, and one that had recently led to Brian's death, the police were met with something unexpected: the quiet sobs of Jesse's mother, Mary. Stunned, police immediately began questioning the woman, and over the next hour, they learned that it was actually this 40-something wife and mother who was secretly behind the Talhotblond username, and that she'd spent months interacting with both Thomas and Brian under the pretense that she was now 18-year-old Jesse, her own daughter, even going so far as to send items to the men, such as real photos of the real Jesse and, shockingly, several pieces of her daughter's lingerie and underwear. On November 27, 2006, Thomas Montgomery was arrested and charged with the murder of Brian Barrett. He pled guilty to the charges and in exchange received a 20-year sentence. Thomas Montgomery was held responsible for his irrational and horrific actions of killing another human being over nothing more than a jealous rage. Not only that, but his wife Cindy filed for divorce during the murder trial. And Mary Sheeler, rightly so, would have to live with her own share of the consequences. Despite posing under a different identity, she never technically broke the law, and prosecutors concluded that while she never crossed a legal line, she did cross some moral and ethical boundaries. But because the law is not enforced on a basis of morals or ethics, Mary could not be charged with anything. However, her husband filed for divorce when he found out what she had done. Her daughter, Jessie, left their West Virginia home and moved in with another family member to get away from her mother, whom she no longer wanted a relationship with in light of her recent actions. This case is a prime example of the notion that you never really know who you're talking with online, especially in the early days of the internet. In this case, both members of a love affair were hiding their true identities from one another, posing as younger versions of themselves and hoping the other person would never find out, or at the very least, they never stopped to think that far ahead. When Talhotblond first met MarineSniper in their chat room, neither one could have imagined that their relationship would come crashing down in a dizzying turn of events involving betrayal, a love triangle, and then, ultimately, murder. This wraps up today's episode of The Dark Omnibus. If you enjoyed the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Every bit of support is greatly appreciated. Also, be sure to turn on all notifications so you don't miss any strange and scary stories in the future. If you're in need of more dark tales from the Omnibus, watch this video and hear the true accounts of some of history's most brutal but lesser known serial killers. Until next time, Dark Ones.